You're kneeling on stone. The floor of the chapel is cold against your knees. You've been praying here since dawn. Around you 14 other nuns do the same. Some whisper the rosary, some weep silently. One has stopped moving entirely. You're not sure if she is praying or if her mind has simply left her body. Outside the convent walls, Otranto is screaming. You can smell the smoke. You can hear the clash of steel, the crack of arquebuses, the sound of doors being smashed open. And underneath it all, a sound that will haunt you until your last breath, the screams of women. 3 days ago, the Ottoman fleet appeared on the horizon. 150 ships, 18,000 soldiers, the largest invasion force Italy had ever seen. The city has 400 defenders. You knew then that Otranto would fall. Everyone knew, but you stayed. Where else would you go? This convent is your home. These walls are where you took your vows, where you promised your body and soul to Christ. Now those walls are shaking. A crash, splinters of wood exploding inward. Turkish soldiers pour through the chapel doors. The first nun to stand is Sister Agata. She's 67 years old. She raises a crucifix toward them like a shield. A scimitar opens her throat before she can speak. Her blood sprays across the altar, across the white habits of the sisters kneeling beside her, across your face. You don't scream. You can't. Your voice has abandoned you. The soldiers grab the youngest nuns first. You watch them drag Sister Lucia by her hair across the stone floor. She's 16 years old. She took her vows only 3 months ago. Then hands close round your arms. August 14, 1480. The fall of Otranto. 800 men would be beheaded on a hill outside the city for refusing to renounce Christ. They became saints. The church built monuments to them. Popes speak their names with reverence. But the women, the nuns, the wives, the daughters, they became something else. They became cargo. And what happened to them in the Ottoman slave markets has never been officially acknowledged by anyone. This is their story. If this grabs you, hit the like button. One click helps us keep uncovering the voices history chose to silence. But before you understand what happened to these women, you need to understand why the Ottomans came to Otranto in the first place. 1480. The Ottoman Empire is at the height of its power. Sultan Mehmed II, the man who conquered Constantinople 27 years earlier, rules from the Bosphorus to the Balkans. He has crushed every Christian army sent against him. He has turned the greatest church in Christendom, the Hagia Sophia, into a mosque, and now he wants Rome. Mehmed believes he is destined to unite the old Roman Empire under Islam. Constantinople was the eastern capital. Rome is the western one. Taking it would make him the supreme ruler of both, but Rome is far, and between the Ottoman lands and the Italian peninsula lies the Adriatic Sea. He needs a foothold, a beachhead, a port where his armies can land and resupply before marching north. He chooses Otranto. It's a small city on the heel of the Italian boot. Otranto is perfect. On July 28, 1480, the Ottoman fleet appears off the coast. Gedik Ahmed Pasha commands the invasion. He's one of Mehmed's most trusted generals, a man who has burned cities across 3 continents. He brings 90 to 150 ships, 18,000 soldiers, cavalry cannons, siege engineers. Otranto has maybe 400 soldiers and a population of civilians who have never seen war. The math is simple. Everyone knows how this ends, but they fight anyway. The siege lasts 15 days. 15 days of bombardment, of Ottoman cannons pounding walls that were built to stop medieval raiders, not modern artillery, of fires breaking out faster than they can be extinguished, of food running low, of water growing scarce. The people of Otranto send desperate messages to Naples, to Rome, to anyone who might help. No one comes. King Ferrante of Naples is fighting a war against Florence. Pope Sixtus IV is tangled in Italian politics. Venice watches from across the Adriatic and does nothing. Otranto is alone. By August 11th, the walls are breached. The Ottomans pour through the gaps. The old men who hid in their homes were dragged into the streets and killed. The priests who rang the church bells calling for God's protection were butchered at their altars. Archbishop Stefano Pendinelli was found praying in the cathedral. They sawed him in half while he was still alive. By nightfall, every male over the age of 15 in Otranto was dead. But that wasn't the end, it was only the beginning, because the next morning the Ottomans turned their attention to the survivors, the women, the children, and the nuns who had spent the siege praying for a miracle that never came. Stay with me, because what happened next? The church spent 5 centuries trying to forget. Subscribe to the Obscure Chronicles. We don't flinch from history's darkest chapters. When the killing ended, the selection began. The Ottomans had a method, refined over generations, cold, mechanical, built to squeeze every coin from every conquered body. Women were separated into tiers. The young and beautiful were set aside immediately. These would go to the officers, Gedik Ahmed Pasha and his commanders, spoils of war for the men who had led the assault. The next tier, women of middling age and appearance, were designated for common soldiers or for sale in the slave markets of Constantinople, Adriatic, and beyond. The old and the sick were often killed on the spot. No market value, no point in feeding them. Children were separated from mothers. Young boys might be taken for the devshirm, the Ottoman system of collecting Christian boys to be raised as Muslim soldiers or administrators. Young girls faced the same fate as their mothers, but the nuns received special attention. Why? Because they were consecrated virgins, brides of Christ. For the Ottoman soldiers, many of whom saw this invasion as a holy war, a jihad against the Christian West, there was particular satisfaction in claiming women who had sworn themselves to the enemy as God. The convent of Otranto held approximately 15 to 20 nuns. The records are incomplete. The Ottomans didn't keep detailed logs, and the church later preferred not to document what happened. What we know comes from fragments, survivor accounts recorded years later, oblique references in Ottoman administrative documents, and the silence itself, the conspicuous absence of any mention of these women in the official The 800 men who refused to convert became saints. The women who suffered beside them became footnotes, or less than footnotes. They became nothing at all. The assault on the convent followed a pattern the Ottomans had used in Constantinople, in the Balkans, in every Christian city they conquered. First, they killed the oldest nuns, the ones with no value as slaves or concubines. Their bodies were left where they fell, in the chapel and the corridors, crumpled against the walls they had prayed within for decades. Then they gathered the rest. The surviving nuns, perhaps 12, perhaps fewer, were stripped of their habits. The white robes that symbolized their purity, their dedication to Christ, torn away and thrown in piles. They were examined, teeth checked, skin inspected, ages estimated. The youngest and most attractive were claimed immediately by the senior officers. These women would become personal concubines, property of individual men, to be used as their owners saw fit. The others were roped together with the civilian women of Otranto, hundreds of women and girls, bound at the wrists, prepared for the march to the harbor, because Otranto was just the collection point. The real destination was across the Adriatic, the slave markets of the Ottoman Empire, where Christian women from Italy would be sold alongside captives from Hungary, from the Balkans, from every land the Ottomans had touched. Think about that for a moment. A woman who had spent her entire adult life in a convent, praying, fasting, copying manuscripts, suddenly chained alongside farmers' wives and merchants' daughters, all of them walking toward a ship that would carry them away from everything they had ever known. Nun or farmer's wife, it made no difference. Vows meant nothing. Status meant nothing. Only age and appearance. Just flesh, weighed by age, priced by the pound. The journey across the Adriatic took 2 to 3 days, depending on weather. The women were packed into the holds of Ottoman transport ships, hundreds of them, cramped spaces designed for cargo, not people. No privacy, no sanitation, minimal food and water. The heat of August in a closed wooden hull, the smell of sweat and urine and fear. The sounds of women weeping, praying, some simply staring at nothing, their minds retreating somewhere the body couldn't follow. Some women died during the crossing. Heat, thirst, bodies giving up. Their remains were thrown overboard without ceremony. The survivors arrived at Ottoman ports, probably Vlora in Albania, or directly to Constantinople itself, and there, the final separation happened. The slave markets of Constantinople were among the largest in the world. Captives from 3 continents passed through them: Slavic women from the north, African women from the south, and now Italian women from the west. The nuns of Otranto, those who had survived the assault, the march, the crossing, were sold alongside the other women of their city. No records document their individual fates. We don't know their names. We don't know who bought them. We don't know where they ended up: in harems in Constantinople, in households in Anatolia, in distant provinces of an empire that stretched from Budapest to Baghdad. They vanished, absorbed into a system designed to erase their identities, their faith, their memories. Within a generation, any children they bore would speak Turkish, worship Allah, know nothing of the mothers who had once worn white habits and prayed to a different god. That was the point. But here's what the church doesn't talk about. Not all the nuns were taken away. Some were kept in Otranto itself. Local concubines for the garrison Gedik Ahmed Pasha left behind to hold the city. For 13 months Otranto remained under Ottoman control. 13 months during which surviving women, including, almost certainly, some of the nuns, served the occupying soldiers. We have almost no documentation of this period. The Ottomans didn't record it. And when the city was finally recaptured in September 1481, the Christian forces didn't document what they found either. The silence is deafening. 813 men martyred on the hill became saints. Their bones were collected, venerated, eventually canonized by Pope Francis in 2013. The women who survived them, who endured what the men were spared by death, they received nothing. No sainthood, no veneration, no acknowledgement at all. Because martyrdom requires death, and what these women experienced was something the church had no framework to honor. They lived, and their living was considered shameful. There's one account that might preserve a fragment of their story. A Venetian merchant named Marco Ferrante passed through the slave markets of Constantinople in the winter of 1480 to 1481. In a letter to his brother preserved in the Venetian state archives, he mentions seeing women of Otranto for sale. He writes, "Among the captives were several who had been religious sisters. You could tell by their bearing, by the way they held themselves apart from the others. One refused to eat. The traders beat her, but she would not open her mouth. She died before she could be sold. One woman, unnamed, who chose starvation over submission. It's the only individual story we have, the only glimpse of a human being behind the statistics. She refused. She resisted. She died on her own terms, rather than accept the fate the Ottomans had planned for her. Was she brave, desperate, simply broken beyond the point of caring? We'll never know. We only know she existed, that she made a choice, that someone noticed her even for a moment. Let that sink in." The occupation of Otranto ended in September 1481. Sultan Mehmed II died in May of that year. His death triggered a succession crisis in Constantinople. Gedik Ahmed Pasha was recalled. The garrison at Otranto was left weakened, undersupplied. A combined force from Naples, Hungary, and the Papal States finally besieged the city. The Ottomans surrendered after a brief fight. When Christian forces entered Otranto, they found a ghost town. The population had been 6,000 before the invasion, perhaps more, with refugees from the surrounding countryside. After liberation, fewer than 300 people remained. The rest were dead or gone, scattered across the slave markets of the Ottoman world. The church immediately began commemorating the 800 martyrs, the men who had chosen death over conversion. Their bones were gathered, cleaned, arranged in the cathedral. They became relics. The women received no such treatment. Their bones, those who had died in the assault, in the convent, in the streets, were buried in unmarked graves or left where they lay. Their stories were not recorded. Their names were not preserved. They disappeared from history. In 2013, Pope Francis canonized the 800 martyrs of Otranto. It was a grand ceremony. Cardinals in red, prayers in Latin, the bones of the martyrs displayed in crystal reliquaries. No one mentioned the women, not the nuns who were dragged from their convent, not the wives who watched their husbands die before being chained themselves, not the daughters sold in markets half a world away. The official martyrology mentions only the men who died. The women who survived, who endured fates that many might consider worse than death, remain invisible. This isn't ancient oversight. This was 2013, a deliberate choice to celebrate one group of victims while ignoring another, because the men's story is clean. They refused to convert, they died, end of story. The women's story is messy. They were violated, they were sold, they were forced to bear children to their captors. Some converted to survive, some didn't. Most will never know anything about. Clean stories become saints, messy stories become silence. The city of Otranto still stands today. The cathedral is there, rebuilt and restored. The bones of the martyrs are displayed in a chapel behind the altar skulls, and femur is arranged in geometric patterns, a monument to their sacrifice. Tourists come, they light candles, they pray. On the hill outside the city, the Colle della Minerva, where the 800 were executed, there's a church, a memorial, a place of pilgrimage. For the women there's nothing, no memorial, no plaque, if no acknowledgement that they existed at all. If you walk through Otranto today, you can visit every site associated with the martyrs, but there's nowhere to go to remember the nuns who were dragged from their convent, the mothers who were separated from their children, the girls who were sold in Constantinople and never seen again. They have been erased so completely that most people don't even know there's something missing. That's the most effective kind of erasure. Not just removing someone from history, but removing any awareness that they were ever removed. Here's what I want you to remember. The 800 martyrs of Otranto made a choice. They chose death over conversion. That choice was brave, and it deserves to be honored. But the women didn't get to make a choice. They weren't offered martyrdom. They weren't given the option to die for their faith. They were simply taken, and then they were expected to disappear, to be absorbed, to be forgotten. Their suffering doesn't fit into the church's narrative of glorious martyrdom, so it was left out. But suffering doesn't require glory to be real. It doesn't require a clean ending to matter. The nuns of Otranto suffered, the women of Otranto suffered, and the fact that no one wrote their names down doesn't mean they didn't exist. They existed, they mattered. And now, 544 years later, someone is finally saying it out loud. If this reached you, subscribe to the Obscure Chronicles. We dig into the chapters history tried to erase, because the past isn't dead. It's waiting in the dark, waiting for someone to remember. We don't look away.